looking at an industrial laser which emits an extraordinary light not to be found in nature. It can project a spot on the moon, or at closer range, cut through solid metal. I will show you.
When it was explained to me, of course, there was some reservations about lying there and how effective this laser really was, but he assured me that it was the actual beam of light was in fact nothing serious. But it's a kind of vulnerable position, like some gynecological exploration or something that one isn't too enamored of.
The heat of the flame actually was the heat of an acetylene torch. That's what it was. Very, very hot.
And there was a little mark underneath where it said stop, you know, and Sean was lying like that, and he could see the flame coming from underneath. And he was saying, I hope that he... Can you see clearly, Johnny, that... and he was looking not too happy at that moment.
Very nasty feeling actually being on the island on my own for the first little bit. And then you know that they're, you know, the rest of them haven't rehearsed, they haven't read the script, they don't know I'm James Bond, that I've got to live. It wasn't fun. I didn't like it. We're halfway into the film and I had to finish the film, so the producers are not, although they would have liked to kill me from time to time, could not afford to lose me, so Ross Kananga had my trousers and my shoes. A little touch that I thought was really your crocodile shoes.
He was dressed up as Bond and he did it. And the time he made the jump, from the moment he touched the first crocodile, the third crocodile had his head up and was waiting for him. And each one made a snap at him, but the third one, as he jumped, as he just left his back, the crocodile caught him in the heel and just snapped his heel. Fortunately, he had thick boots on, and it didn't go through the boots, and he managed to drag his foot free. But, I mean, that emphasizes the reason that Roger wasn't going to do it.
These guys are fantastic. I think they're the best in the world. I mean, if they didn't do their job right, and if I didn't trust them, I could easily have fallen off one of those tanker trucks and licensed to kill. And that would be bad enough, but remember, behind that truck's another big truck with a camera, so you'd go under that one as well. And I think, you know, often in life you do things not because you are brave, but because you are a kind of perverse coward. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, if I'd have been on my own, I wouldn't have done it. But because there's other guys there, you can't say no, you know, because you're not going to have them thinking you're some kind of dickhead or something.
There was times where I would put him in a position, I'd wire him off to a certain extent, but then he would go that bit further. He would lean off the, like on License to Kill, on the back of the plane that he came down on a safety harness on a helicopter. But took tremendous courage to come down and to touch the back of the plane and mess around with it. He would push it a bit further, he'd lean out further, he'd give the camera more, but give me a heart attack at the same time. I would be saying, Timothy, please, slow down, come back, don't go so far. But he was giving everything he could for the movie and for Bond.
I like to think that each actor that we've had play James Bond brings his own personality to the part, and when we talked to Timothy, you know, we agreed that we would change the style to suit Timothy's particular talents.
Here, hold on, you're dead! We had 4 minutes to make Timothy the new Bond. and we discussed it and decided that I could tie him onto top of the Jeep and he would be as safe as houses. I knew he was strong enough to hold on, but did he have the courage to hold on the bends and things like that? He goes down that mountain, not wired on, just holding handholds, and he did very well. I mean, tremendous courage. And all the stuff that he did on that movie was, he did the action.
When we first started to talk about the Land Rover crashing off the top of Rock of Gibraltar in the opening sequence of The Living Daylights, there was an idea that we could push a Jeep out of the back of a C-130 transport airplane with a stuntman on top. Having a number of worries and doubts, we thought it probably best to do a test of this first. So we got up to 10,000 feet and it was swaying around all over the place. We lowered a stuntman down from the helicopter until he was on top of the Land Rover. And we tripped to release, or the stuntman did, and the Land Rover fell, and the stuntman fell, but not as fast as the Land Rover. It made quite an extraordinary noise, I'm told, when it hit the ground. And the Land Rover, which started off as being about 6 feet tall, ended up that thick, just flattened on the ground. So it was at that point that we decided to revert to plan B. And we fired a Land Rover with an air cannon off the top of Beachy Head, with a dummy in the back and the Land Rover alight. You become a stuntman because you like the burst of adrenaline. People become, fight bulls because they love, Nigel Mansell drives like that because he likes that rush of things. I don't like that rush. I can live quite happily without it.
The stunt's been called by a couple of very generous reviewers the greatest and one of the greatest stunts in film history. And it wasn't in terms of, of being very complex. Some of these stunts are really complex and technological. This one, I almost felt that Gravity should have got equal billing, equal credit as, I didn't really have to do that much except go over the edge. If it is to be labeled a great stunt, I really think it has to do with the setting.
It was like an expedition. We spent nearly 3 weeks actually securing the camera positions to climb the rock and to secure all the handholds and what have you. And we weren't dealing with mountaineers. We were dealing with studio cameramen, who weren't really used to this sort of thing.
So we get on top and we have these things that parachutists use called wind drift indicators. They're just sort of crepe paper, and you stand on top and you throw it out. And sure, it goes down, snaking back and forth, and it just very slowly goes in towards the face of the cliff. And this stunt is very prohibitive. If you have any wind that could drive you back into the face once that parachute's open, you're going to get creamed.
And when I signaled for Rick Sylvester to begin his ski down the slope, the sun was off the mountain and was just on Rick Sylvester as he came down. It was, if I'd been a gambling man, that would have been the precise moment in time that I would have shot it. He was absolutely spotlighted by the sun. It was the last possible second that we could have achieved that shot. And wherever that played in the world, people just stood up and applauded because it had that. It typified Bond, the audacity of Bond,
sequence in the Everglades was quite an exciting sequence, and we had a lot of boats, and they were traveling at very, very high speed. We had an American stunt crew that were driving these boats, but in actual fact, I call them a stunt crew, but they were really boat handlers, and some of them had never been involved in stunts for films. They were just good at handling these boats.
We had to make a little run-up, so when the boat chase is on, there's a wedding going on, and we'd put marquees up, the cake was there, and we'd now made the track of where we wanted this particular boat to go. And we had our second driver, who was doubling for Roger, and he came being followed. He came up the bank exactly where we expected him to come, went sliding across the garden, but on the opposite side there were about 4 or 5 cypress trees, and he should have gone between them, but he didn't. He went bang, and the whole side of the boat was wiped out.
I was angry with the stunt driver for having hit the tree, because the boat was now kaput and we had to get the spare boat out, and there was no boat to take me home.
Ah, there you are, 007.
Balls, Q.
Bolus, 007. Good. Have that ready for Army Day.
Yes, sir. Well, now, Roger and I have been very old friends. I mean, I first worked with him on Ivanhoe, so it shows how long I've known him. And he knew this perfectly well. And he used to just sit there or stand there when I had my close-up with, look, you're not going to get this, are you? And, I mean, it really was. He was, as you know, a great joker. And, I mean, sometimes I'd get like, and I'd see Roger standing there, and he'd hold up a thing with bollocks written on it. And so that was, you know, quite difficult to remember my lines.
Now, pay attention, please. Windscreen bulletproof, as are the side and the rear windows. Revolving number plates, naturally. Valid all countries.
I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, so I had to learn it, rather like a parrot. And Sean used to fidget in the character with the gadgets. And of course that made me suddenly, for heaven's sake, stop it, I can't remember my lines. So, I mean, a lot of the sort of aggro, whatever you like to call it, is really because I can't remember my lines. And that, I think, helped very much.
Ingenious and useful, too. Allow a man to stop off for a quick one en route.
It has not been perfected out of years of patient research entirely for that purpose, 007.
Q's department, of course, he was the man that was supposedly responsible for all the gadgets, which actually we came up with the gadgets, obviously. In fact, Desmond, he'll tell you he couldn't knock a nail in the wall. He's not gadget-minded at all, but a darn good actor. So we'd go through very thoroughly and explain to him exactly what the gadgets did, and quite often the script was written on the day we shot it, when it came to sort of things like that. But he was marvellous. I mean, he could pick it up straight away, and of course, Q is Q, and totally convinced everybody.
I think a lot of the gadgets are, as I say, prototypes. And what you are seeing is what the inventors of the gadgets would really like it to look like when it's finished. And perhaps 10, 15 years' time, they do use them. I mean, for instance, there's this one here, which is the bleeper, which was used in Russia with Love.
Excuse me.
What?
Give me my shirt, will you?
What's going on?
I have to make a phone call.
When Thunderball was made, there was no such thing as a small underwater camera. And it was used in the film. And I believe that this is the prototype of the very small Nokomis today. But this was, so I understand, the first underwater camera. So that, I mean, there are so many things of these gadgets. And I believe, for instance, for the underwater car, But what happens is that they hear that a gadget or a car or whatever is wanted for a Bond film. Well, of course, you can't get into Pinewood for cars. I mean, everybody goes down there and say, oh, please use my car. And, of course, they picked the Lotus.
The Lotus really did adapt, as you can see, nicely into an underwater car. And then, of course, the problem was, how are we going to make it? How are we going to actually shoot this sequence using an underwater car? And also, we had to have this effect where the car transforms from a road car into a submersible. And the sequence, although it only took something like 30 seconds in the film, we had 7 full-size body shells that were given to us by Lotus and 3 miniatures to actually achieve that effect. We used a full-size road car which drove onto the jetty, so it had to be timed as the helicopter came down beside the car. It fired at the car and you saw all the things exploding. The next shot we used a miniature which we shot in the Bahamas, and I rolled it down a ramp. That was one of the miniatures, and the other miniature was used when it was going towards, it had to go behind a rock, and we couldn't find any rocks big enough to actually hide the full-size Lotus. The Lotus car couldn't go behind any rocks because there was nothing in that particular area that was big enough for the car to go behind, so we had to use a miniature. Other than that, all the sequences were done with the wet submersible and the full-size cars that transformed.
I think that was a great sequence. I mean, I think that the special effects were quite magnificent on that. The way the car, where you see the car actually change into a feasible thing that could operate underwater.
And of course there was the other car too when it came out of on the beach, and that was a dummy car which was towed out, but the contraption under the sand, as it travelled and cut a groove in the sand for the mechanism to work, we had a brush, just an ordinary sweeping brush on the back, so it actually filled in the crack as it passed.
Do I remember the first gadget? I think it was something like a magnet on a watch or something that I pulled the zip of Madeline Smith's dress down. I've been trying to get a gadget like that since.
It really turned out to be quite a simple effect in the end, but it was something that when you read it in the script, you know, you start to work out complicated ways of doing it. I think at that particular time, to see that it did work, I got one of the boys to put the dress on, and we tried it that way, so that we had a good idea it was going to work.
I had a horrendous, very old-fashioned bra was put on my rather copious bosom. I remember that I was a double D at least at the time. I don't know why or where it came from, but anyway, there were these terrible things jutting out from which I wished to be dissociated. And so I was, this appalling bra was bought for me, and the material was actually swathed over the top of it and fitted round me, exactly like a glove, like a kid glove. I couldn't move or breathe in this very horrendous item. And consequently, the zip was sort of installed, if you like, with very little of me, very little room for manoeuvre. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
I told her that I would have to have my hand up her skirt, and she didn't seem to object. And she said, well, it's fine, you know. And I told her why, that I would have to be pulling the skirt so that when I pulled the zip on the wire, that it wouldn't sort of ruckle up and stop the zip from coming undone.
Maddie is in a romantic clinch with James Bond. What you don't see is that under her skirt, at the bottom there, is Derek Meddings, and his assistant is on a ladder at the other end above her, holding the tension on a piece of fish wire that is pulling the zipper down. And as all this is going on, I'm saying, you know, squeeze her tighter, Roger, slower with the zip. I could see your head, Derek. Get under a skirt more.
There was obviously a lot of bawdy comments went on, but I don't engage in bawdy humour, as you know.
When you're making a film, there are two things. You're very, what's the word, monomaniac, really. You've got to get the shot. If it says in the script that there's a fight on a cable car, you've got to do it. I mean, you've got to get it. It's almost like war, really. You do it, even though you're terrified that something ghastly is going to happen. I mean, you do everything you can to prevent an accident, but obviously there are accidents happen in films because by the very nature of what you're trying to do.
We were actually up on the cable car, and we were right at the top, at the highest point, and we moved, the cable car was moved back about 30 meters, so there was a complete sheer drop.
Oh, I think somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 feet up. And the point was that neither Martin nor I could use safety harnesses and wires and cables because we had to go round and round fighting in and out of the girders on top of the cable car. And quite obviously, we would have been tangled up. There was, in fact, one moment when I had to tip over the side. And the idea was that Lewis would shout, "Cut." I would then attach myself with the wire and fall over the side. And I was desperately waiting for the word "cut," this magic word, and it didn't. And we reached that point in the fight where Martin knocks me over the side, and I had no alternative but to go, grab the handrail at the edge of the cable car, and hang on for real. I think Lewis had quite forgotten that, in fact, I wasn't attached by anything other than just pure terror.
That takes in an incredible amount of courage. And of course, Lewis, when he heard about it, he thought it was unbelievable.
And even my mother, you know, to this day, she absolutely is convinced that it's me, and she thinks I'm so brave. Little does she know that I suffered from vertigo. I don't even like being this tall. I did enjoy the one scene where I bit into the cable car. I wondered how they were going to do that, and it was just fantastic. They had a confectionery company make braided licorice. They made all these little licorice things, and then they braided the strands, and then they took those strands that were braided, and they braided those together, and they had this wonderful cable, looked like a real steel cable. And so I was able to bite it in half. I had to do it about 30 times, and so I happen to like licorice. It tastes a lot better than the steel teeth.
Of course, we never imagined that we were going to find somebody of 7'4" who would wear the steel teeth, but he was enormous, absolutely enormous guy. But not much strength, strangely enough, like all very huge people, like giants. He didn't really have the strength that you see in the film.
So my first reaction was, gee, that's kind of silly, and but then I started thinking about how I could make this character interesting and fun. And I thought, well, that kind of a character could be sort of a comic strip, unbelievable, and it seemed to work real well. The teeth were so uncomfortable that they caused a very stoic look because, you know, you're trying to keep from gagging. And I was like,
You know when you get a little piece of silver paper and a piece of chocolate in the cinema and how it drives you mad. Can you imagine a whole mouthful of that? Poor man.
And it probably put his tongue near the back of his throat, which made him feel sick all the time. So he would only put them in at the very last second and take them out as soon as the shot was over.
I collect big game fish for various marine institutions. Magnificent creatures.
Charming.
The notorious golden grotto sharks, the most savage, the most dangerous. They know when it's time for them to be fed.
When we're doing the shark sequence in Largo's Pool in Nassau, what we had there, they were the catches of these sharks, and I mean, we're not talking about tiddlers. These were big sharks, around about 7 to 8 feet long. And we had about 40 to 50 of these things swimming around this pool.
And we were told that these sharks are not man-eaters, you know, they're okay. But as we were trying to keep them alive by pushing them around the pole with great sticks, just keep them moving, because you had to keep the sharks moving to keep them alive, to oxygenate the water. And one just turned around. Now these poles are about as thick as my wrist. And the shark just turned around and bit the pole in half. So I thought, well, if they're not man-eaters, they're not going to do you much good if they give you a kiss. Yeah.
Then the next problem was how to get Sean in together with the sharks. And I had decided to build like a corridor out of plexiglass, out of perspex, 4x8 sheets, and had the shark go up and down behind the perspex corridor and Sean on this side of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the whole length of swimming pool covered by plexiglass sheets because they couldn't supply me in time, so there was a gap, a 4-foot gap.
Well, Sean said, not bloody likely. And I said, look, Sean, it's perfectly safe. You're behind a plate glass. You're in a little tank of your own. And I said, the only way the sharks can get in is if they can jump in the air like a dolphin. He said, well, how do I know sharks can't? I said, you have my word for it. He says, not good enough. Third time we did it, something went wrong with the chute. And 2 sharks got into the tunnel. And believe me, the shot we have in the picture, Sean Connery is not acting. He looks as the shark goes by and does a very cool, wary look, and suddenly goes, Jesus, because there's another shark coming by.
And I was in the wrong side with the shark. And I got out of the water without, I think I was dry when I touched the side.
And I'm trying to attract the attention of the what's the name, the camera operator, who's filming like crazy. And he suddenly sees what's going on, and he takes the camera and he goes bump like this and hits the first shark on the nose, hits the second shark, and goes on filming.
I don't know whose fault it was, but it didn't happen again.
Stuntmen live their lives to the full. You know, they're great on location. Go around with the stuntmen, you get into trouble.
When I sit here, I probably look very calm, but I believe there's a switch, and I know I've got that switch, and I can actually turn it on now. I mean, originally when I first started, probably it was a little bit wild, and it had to be controlled, and that's normal. Young people always tend to have this aggression, and that was channeled over the early years of my career. But certainly when I got into a good situation, or a big stunt situation, the adrenaline does flow. And I mean, now I can't believe the things that I've done in the past. I think, did I really do that? Did I really hang from a helicopter 300 feet up over Beckton? You know, was I on that cable car? I always feel it must be another person.
I think probably the most hair-raising thing that Martin did was doubling for me on the side of the train in Octopussy. And he had a foul accident because the stretch of railway line they were using, they'd already used up, and the train was going, and it was an area that he'd not rehearsed over.
Climbing on the top, running along the top, climbing down the side, going underneath, coming from underneath the train. And all that I had done without any problem. I mean, it was like child's play to me, actually. I mean, it was like second nature. I was enjoying it.
There was a concrete stanchion. We were already in India shooting when the accident happened. But he was hit, the train doing about 35, 40 miles an hour, and he was hit by the concrete on his side. But he's so strong that he just kept holding on because he knew it was too fast to fall off.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be looking forward. I had to be looking through the window. And I just got hit, and I was very lucky that I didn't get wiped out completely. The extraordinary thing is that they told me that when I got hit, my body just flipped up in the air, and I was just hanging on by one hand. Now, if I was to say a stuntman did that in reality, I would say there's no way he could hang on, but somehow magically, I was still there when I'd gone past the bridge. Well, I had 3 months in traction in hospital, and then I had about 3 months on crutches, you know, and that was like a terrible situation, because from being an extremely fit and active person, all of a sudden I was immobile, you know. And it's worse for somebody who's so active to all of a sudden come to a dead stop.
He was many, many months recuperating. But he was back again, you know, it's amazing. He can run as he did before. He'll suffer when he gets to my age, though.
With Sean, all the violence was dismissed with a joke. I mean, for instance, when the chap was in the bath and he throws the electric fire in, I mean, that is, if you think of it, it's absolutely ghastly, but he says...
Shocking.
And the man is shot with a spear. I mean, you imagine a spear gun going into you, the mess it would make. But he says, well, I think he got the point. So that you never actually think of the violence.
That kind of one-lined humor that we really initiated in there is all over. I mean, Arnold does it in his movies too, you know. It's become a kind of almost a trademark, and it's so accepted now that nobody thinks of where it started.
Well, he's certainly left with his tails between his legs.
I think that's one of the best stunts I've ever seen in any movie. That was B.J. Worth and Jake Lombard. Well, they were amazing. I mean, that was 15,000 foot hanging off the back of a plane. They were just brilliant. Brilliant.
This, again, was one of those major sequences which was spread probably over 5 weeks. And a segment at a time was done, and we had very stringent safety precautions. It was shot over the Mojave Desert, and we used to have a safety man who would, when BJ was fighting on the back, there was a great danger he would fall off, which he did on several occasions. And the standard procedure was the safety man, as soon as he saw BJ fall away, would dive after him, catch him up, as we did in Moonraker, and be prepared to pull his chute in case he was knocked unconscious during the fall. And in fact, on one occasion, BJ got very, very close to for that happening to being knocked. He was knocked against the fuselage of the airplane, great turbulence, and fell off. And I think he was semi-conscious, and the safety man was right alongside him, within seconds, ready to deploy his chute for him.
No! Please! No!
The Bonds in the 90s has differed from the 60s because of the amount of expectation of the audience. We have other films to compete with now, and we have to make sure that we are more spectacular, more sensational, and sometimes more looking dangerous than they were in the early 60s. A man could drive a car fast or do a high fall, and it was really sensational. These days, the technology has to, and the expectation of the audience is such that we have to do more and more dangerous things.
If you think back to when Dr. No first came into being and look at the films that have been made since then, the Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Superman, and all those pictures were made in England, then you can see where one has had to keep improving just to keep abreast and keep ahead of the times.
I'm an actor, and the people with me are movie makers, and no one wants to get killed. Nobody wants to break a leg. You know, we want to make movies, and the only way you can make movies is to stay alive. So you make sure that they're safe.
You could have had everything. Don't you want to know why?
So I doubled for Sanchez getting on fire. Timothy was sitting in front of me. I was gelled up and ready to go. I had 3 minutes of air because I had a full face mask and it was going to be a full burn. They're the most dangerous. You cannot see where you're going. Time and everything seems to alter. You're just totally lost in this roaring canyon of fire around you.
You have to be very careful with the timing of putting the rubber gel on him, because if you put it on too soon, the fumes from the rubber gel get into the clothing and it can start to burn on the inside rather than the outside. So there are a number of considerations to make.
We have certain signs that we have to show to each other that we are okay or that we are not okay. The heat is tremendous. I mean, it gets hotter. It doesn't, you don't just get hot immediately. It gets warmer and then it gets hot, and then you really start feeling it. You have no time to try to estimate. It's just really the pain threshold that you're coming to, that you want to be put out. At that point, you know that beyond that, you will start blistering, and that's what we don't want. That's when we have to lay out flat, and they know to put you out.
Half the world loved Sean Connery. Half the world loved Roger Moore. They might all combine together and hate me, which fortunately didn't happen. But I mean, it's a big concern. Taking over is difficult.
Waiter.
Don't bring out 57.
Sir? Why do you persist in rescuing me, Mr. Bond?
It's becoming a habit, isn't it, Contessa Teresa?
Teresa was a saint. I'm known as Tracy.
Well, Tracy, next time play it safe and stand on 5.
People who want to stay alive play it safe.
Please stay alive. At least for tonight.
It's very difficult to take a little Australian boy, a big Australian boy, who'd just done advertising work and commercials, and give him this part. This was the part that many actors would have given their eye teeth for, as it were. So he had a tremendous amount of ego, really. And he thought of it, naturally enough, he thought of it as a great possibility. It was going to, do tremendous things for him. And perhaps it could have done, but I think it went a little to his head, I suppose, is what they say.
What was I, a high school dropout who had nothing? I couldn't even get a room in a decent hotel, even if I had the money. You had to be somebody, do you know what I mean? And I thought, well, this will at least give me a name or something. I had no fears whatsoever. In fact, I remember one of the statements I made. They said, Harry Saltzman asked me, he said, what's your body look like? And I said, better than Connery's. I mean, that was my attitude. Sorry, Sean, because that's probably not true. Who knows, But I started to take my clothes off, because I was so, up myself, as they say. I was very, very sure of myself. I had very little experience compared to what I have now, and it shows in my life. I mean, you can see it in my eyes in lots of places. Some places I pull it off, but I don't want that camera hanging around there on me for a long time. In those days, and Peter was clever. He protected me in that way.
And George, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, just tended to be just 1 or 2 beats below, having the same a professional approach that Sean had and that Roger later had. I wouldn't say he was amateur, but he was certainly looked upon it more as a game than a serious profession, which indeed it is and always will be.
I did my own stunts because I thought I was under the illusion that every actor did their own stunts. I mean, I was disappointed that I wasn't allowed to ski. You know, I enjoyed skiing, and I thought I could do some of it. The insurance company cut me out of that, and I was upset. But Peter wanted to be able to get in close with the camera. It works better for stunts, and so I was an athletic kind of guy. I mean, it didn't bother me. I remember I pulled my shoulder out of joint doing one of the stunts, and Peter, you know, said, he's tough, he's Australian, he can handle it, just keep going, you know, and I had to keep doing the same stunt over with my shoulder out.
I don't think you could step into Connery's shoes, but I think he did a credible job as James Bond, and I think he would have gone on to have done more and was very, very good.
Now, the reason I didn't do another Bond was, there's a lot more to it than this, but to cut it short is that I thought it was Connery's gig. I thought, I'm already famous. Why try and stay in something that I felt it was finished? I thought it was over. You know, once Connery had finished it, and the times were changing. The whole hippie thing had started. And here was this conservative character, detective. And I thought, well, to stay with this, I'm going to go down with a sinking ship. And I left.
All of these things happened, but the main thing that happened with us was the technicians. The people that worked with us are the best part of this whole campaign that we started. The boys that worked for us, from Ken Adam and Terrence Young, and all of these people were phenomenal. They were so phenomenal that after we completed Dr. No, and we went on to do the other films, Russia with Love, Goldfinger, they all hung about and stood with us because they enjoyed making them.
You know, I stressed the team element, certainly, about these films, but, I mean, Terrence was the director that set the sort of style of it, and, I mean, when I did the first Bond films, Terrence really took me in hand and sort of knocked me into shape with his tailor and, you know, and the Turnbull Nasser shirts and all the gear. And, but what we did share, and still share to this day, is a very mutual sense of humor about what we consider as kind of funny and what we think is style in a way.
I don't know, we went into it having no idea what the hell we were really getting ourselves into. It was a fun picture. I don't think I've ever made a film where I've had more giggles all day long on the picture, because we didn't want to send it up. It had to be done straight, but with a slight tongue-in-cheek.
I'd worked with Terence before in They Were Not Divided and played a Welsh tank driver, and he wanted to be played Q as a Welshman. And I said, well, no, it wouldn't work. And he said, well, try it. And I battled with him quite a long time and said, and in the end I gave up. And I said, right, you want it like this. Now here is the original suitcase from Russia with Love. It's, as you can see, rather battered because it is nearly 30 years old. Well, I said, what, do you want me to play it like this? Look, this lovely briefcase I've got here. I just press the button and out comes a knife. And he said, no, no, you're quite right. So I have played him as an English civil servant ever since.
You see, we had very little money. Everybody forgets this. Dr. No was made for $1 million. And when you think that the set of the volcano in You Only Live Twice cost $1 million, you can see how far, you know, we've come a long way, baby, you know.
It was a gigantic set. And we used over 700 tons of structural steel to build it. And, you know, the problem is that I started questioning my sanity at times, because it's one thing to tell the producers, yes, I can build this for $1 million. And the other thing is, A, can you really do it? B, are you crazy? if it doesn't work, you'll never work in the business again. And I remember breaking out in a rash and an eczema and went to see a skin specialist, and he said, take a few Valiums because there's nothing otherwise I can do for you. But it needed a lot of conviction and I think courage, hopefully, and great backup.
It was a very complimentary team, and the evidence that of Ken Adams' contribution is so blatant. I mean, just progressively through the films as he made them, and the irony was that I think he insisted at one stage to be called the production designer instead of the art director, and he lost an Academy Award, I think. In a funny way, they should have got, I think, more recognition for the sets and for special effects and all sorts of things in the Bond films, and they really did.
The first Bond movie I saw was Dr. No, in my local cinema in a place called Belper in Derbyshire.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
I must have been, I don't know, about 14 years old, something like that. And, you know, the only movies we'd seen were kind of war pictures or sort of drawing room comedies or westerns. And here was something that just was right up to date and really terrific. It was fabulous. But then, you know, that's not news. I mean, people all over the world felt exactly the same thing. And that's the reason why, you know, we're 30 years down the road.
I remember going to one of the early screenings in Westwood. The theater manager came to me and said, Mr. Broccoli, there are two friends of mine here that would like to see the film. I don't remember correctly whether it was Dr. No or whether it was Russia with Love or Goldfinger. But he introduced me to these two chaps. One was Mr. Spielberg and the other was Mr. Lucas. And I said, certainly, and they went up and sat in our seats that we had up in this little theater in Westwood. And I think that they enjoyed it. I don't remember hearing from them, but I know they enjoyed Bond.
Well, fun enough, we did talk about it when we were doing Indiana Jones, which was a great, fun experience making that film. Once we got to know each other and knew what we were doing, as it were. He did say that he would love to have directed a Bond film, and that it affected a great deal of his childhood watching films. Obviously, everything influences everybody, but he's very inventive, Spielberg, and I think he would have made a very interesting Bond film.
And I got a phone call from Orson saying, my name is Orson Welles, I'd very much like you to have dinner with me. So I couldn't come that night, I went the next night. And before we even started dinner, Orson Welles just said straight out, he said, I want to tell you something. He said, I've just seen your picture, and in a strange way, it's changed the vocabulary of the cinema. And as I said, I really didn't quite know what he meant later on. But he said something very shrewd afterwards. Orson was a very good film critic, by the way. He would have been a marvelous critic. He said, you'll find within 2 years, every film of this type tries to imitate this style. And he said, in the end, they'll do it better than you did. So, he's probably right.